I first met our speaker, Heather Macre, at the Humanist Resistance Book Club meeting several months ago in Central Phoenix. We had just read a book by John Fleck about water in the West, and she was there to help facilitate the discussion. In the book, Fleck discusses what he claims are 3 myths about water. The first one is water is for fighting for. Second, water flows uphill toward money. And 3, we are about to run out of water. So he shows that throughout the history of the Colorado River water rights, 1, collaborative agreements are far more common than winner-take-all. 2, richer cities have far less water than their farming cousins. And 3, if we recognize our abilities to make do with less and invest in institutions that facilitate water sharing, we won't run out of water. Heather is here to discuss the reality of those myths today in Arizona. She was elected to her first term on the Central Arizona Water Conservation District Board of Directors on November 6, 2012, to represent Maricopa County. She was re-elected in 2018 and will serve until 2024. Ms. Macre is also a partner at Aiken, Shank, Hawkins, and Riccardi, where she practices commercial litigation and healthcare law. She earned a BA from the University of Florida and a law degree from the University of Florida Levin College of Law. Ms. Macre is a member of Phoenix Suns Charities 88. She has served on the Phoenix Environmental Quality Commission and the Board of Planned Parenthood Advocates of Arizona. Ms. Macre is married to Stephen Kruzek and has 1 daughter, Dorothy. Ms. Macre enjoys reading and spinning, and I also just learned that she has done a lot of pro bono work for very humanistic ideals. So please help me with a warm welcome to Heather Macre.
Hi. Hi, everyone. Hopefully you can hear me. I'm going to try and get this presentation going. Though honestly, if we don't have the slides, we'll live. And again, my name, I'm a trial lawyer, so I tend to pace. So you'll see me walk around. Hopefully it doesn't bother you guys. I'm Heather Macre. I'm on the Central Arizona Water Conservation District Board of Directors. So I want to talk to you a little bit today about what we do and about some of the challenges facing our water supply here in the state of Arizona. I will tell you as well, I really like questions, and I want to talk about what you guys want to talk about. So don't hold your questions to the end. If you have questions, just raise your hand up. I will do my best to get to everyone. But these presentations, no pun intended, can be quite dry. So if you have questions, yeah, I know. And I start with a bad joke. If you have questions, just go right ahead and pop your hand up. So the first thing I want to tell you a little bit is about what we do. Again, I sit on the Central Arizona Water Conservation District Board of Directors. It is a mouthful. But what we do is we oversee the Central Arizona Project. The Central Arizona Project, or CAP, is a 336-mile-long series of canals that runs from Lake Havasu to Tucson. What we're doing is we are bringing in about half of Arizona's allotment of Colorado River water. We are bringing it in off of Lake Havasu, and then we are serving 3 counties here in Arizona. We serve Maricopa, Pima, and Pinal counties. The canals themselves are an engineering marvel. 336 miles, we are constantly pumping that water because we don't have the advantage of gravity flow. Most of our flow is actually uphill because of the different elevations in Arizona between Lake Havasu to our terminus, which I'm really short, but it's above my head, which all of this is above my head, let's be honest, to our terminus, which is just south of Tucson. We have 14 pumping plants that lift the water about 3,000 feet. We have 10 siphons, which are actually sort of sucking the water forward. We've got 3 tunnels. We deliver 500 billion gallons of water annually. That is about 1.5 million acre feet. Acre feet is the term that we use in water. To give you an idea of how much this is beyond just 500 billion gallons, because I'll be honest, that number kind of blows my mind. 1 acre foot is enough to cover a football field with 1 foot of water. So we are delivering annually about 1.5 million acre feet of water. It is a lot of water. and a lot of it is your drinking water. We started deliveries in 1985 in Maricopa County, and construction was complete with that terminus just south of Tucson in 1993. So this is a massive project. Now, you've probably seen some of the CAP canals here in the Phoenix area as you're driving around. Fun fact, this is a great way to impress people on date night. Kids love these fun facts, is that there's a really easy way to tell a CAP canal from an Srp canal. One is that our canals are a lot bigger and they're all concrete lines, but the real easy, like quick 2-second from the roadway, is that all of our canals are fenced in and not open to the public. That is because we are also considered a federal disaster management facility, so we cannot have the public near our canal system at any time. The Srp canals, on the other hand, are lovely and canal-scaped, and you can walk or run or walk your dog next to them. So if you see a fence beside the canal and like a really scary warning sign, that's my organization. Hi. Hi. They don't put my face on those signs, thankfully. But if you see a canal that's nice and open, that is an Srp canal. That's just an easy way to kind of know the difference. Srp is the other major water system here in the valley. It is getting water from the Salt and Verde rivers. Some of those are tributaries of the Colorado River, so the water mix that we have here is actually pretty similar in terms of admixture. Which I know you guys were always like, what is the admixture of my water? Now you know. So this is our service area. As I mentioned, we served 3 counties. It's 23,790 square miles, according to people who are much better at math than I am. We serve 5 million people. Because of the 3 counties we serve, they are the most populous counties in Arizona, and so we are serving about 80% of Arizona's population. Depending on where you live, if you live in this area, we are your drinking water. So it's an incredibly important source. We also serve 350 acres of irrigated agriculture. Most of that is in Pinal County, though there is some agriculture in Maricopa and in Pima counties. And we also serve 11 of our Native American tribes. We'll talk about that in a sec. So who gets all of this water? You know, we have all of this water, who's actually getting it? And I think sometimes these numbers surprise people. About 33% is going to our municipal and industrial customers. Obviously, our municipal customers are mostly cities and counties and towns locally. Our industrial customers include some of the larger employers here in Arizona. For example, Intel is one of our large customers right here in the valley. About 26% goes to agriculture. I think a lot of people think that number is a lot higher. I will tell you that it used to be a lot higher. If you looked at that number 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago, it was much closer to 50%. But we're seeing a lot less irrigated agriculture, and we're also seeing agriculture that's much more water smart. We work quite a bit with our agricultural partners to get that water use down as low as it can go and still have a safe yield of crops. 35% goes to Native American communities. Most of that water is administered through federal treaties. Different tribes have federal treaties which they negotiate directly as sovereign nations with the federal government. But once they have that treaty and once they have that entitlement, the big step is, where do they actually get the water? You know, you can have paper water or a treaty that entitles you to water, but if you don't actually have a delivery system or a supply, it's kind of meaningless. About 35% of that water that we have in the canal system is actually going to meet those federal treaty obligations. CAP is a federal project. We were started by the federal government and paid for by the federal government. The state of Arizona is paying for CAP and will be the owner. The earliest would be 2048. We are in repayment. So as of right now, because of our federal roots, we are one of the main sources of water. We're also one of the main sources, quite frankly, of wet water here in the state of Arizona. So if you're going to fulfill these treaties, we're typically the ones who do it. And then 6% goes to recharge. What is recharge? Recharge is exactly what it sounds like. This is where we are actually putting water in either at the subsurface, which you can see pictured here, or we're actually just putting it in underground. And we are using some of our Colorado River water to recharge the aquifers and the groundwater supply here in the state of Arizona. We have 2 types of recharge facilities. The ones we have pictured here are the more fun ones where you actually have water on the surface and it sort of trickles down into the aquifer. Where the 202 meets the 101, if you sometimes see water there, that's one of our recharge facilities. So if you've ever driven there and you're like, sometimes there's water and sometimes there's not, Sort of depends on where it is in the recharge cycle. Most of our recharge facilities, however, are underground where we're directly injecting water underground. Didn't bring any pictures of those because there is literally nothing to see. People ask all the time, how come I never see those? And I'm like, it is underground. Yes?
Are you going to speak more about the Native Americans? You said there is an issue with them getting the water.
Well, there's an issue with them getting the water unless they have an agreement with a sub-organization like us.
Are you going to describe more how much they are getting and how
They're getting 35% of our 1.5 million acre feet, so that's about a third of our water. It goes to 11 different tribes. The largest tribe that gets water from us is the Ak-Chin. The second largest is the Gila River Indian community. Obviously, we are mostly dealing with Native American tribes that are along our system. They actually have their own turnouts all along the canal. You don't really see them in Central Phoenix because they're mostly outside of town just because of the facilities needed. But we actually have little gates off of the canals that go to what we call turnouts. And when I say it's a gate, it is quite literally a gate. You'll see like a portion of the canal with a gate that we can open and close. We control them all from our control center, which is actually in North Phoenix. It's all controlled by computer, though we do have at least 3 people in there 24/7 in case anything goes wrong. We can respond very quickly. But they'll open up the turnout, and then the turnouts will go onto tribal land. Most of that water is used for tribal agriculture. We are seeing more developments now, whether with the Salt River, Pima, Maricopa, the Gila River Indian community are doing quite a bit. The Ak-Chin are starting to get into it, where they're doing more what I would call family recreation, hotels, racetracks, the aquarium in North Scottsdale. The aquarium, and I have a 4-year-old, so I'm quite familiar with, there's an aquarium in Dinosaur Land. That's all actually on tribal lands, and so we're seeing the tribes get more and more into what I would call ecotourism and recreation. But still, the majority of the water that Native American communities are using right now is for their agriculture. The other thing they're doing right now is they're actually selling some of that water back to us, which is what we're using for the Drought Contingency Plan, which we will talk about. But that's a couple slides forward. But thank you for the question. Anybody else? It's really better if I just talk about what you want to talk about instead of this. Yeah.
I miss seeing the goats in your recharge facility.
Yeah.
What happened to the goats? 'Cause
They're
there's all
still,
this brush going
they get moved around. Someone asked what happens to the goats in our recharge facilities. Because we're dumping water in the desert, we tend to get a lot of growth, and we want the water to recharge into the aquifer instead of create more cottonwoods. So we have goats. They're an actually really great eco-friendly way of controlling the brush, but we have to move them around. So the goats will be back. In the summer, we move the goats up to like sort of the cooler areas of the system. They are very well taken care of, goats.
How many goats do you have?
I want to say we have 60 right now. And like I said, we have different, I think they're called herds. I think you have a herd of goats. And I apologize, I am a trial lawyer. I don't know what you call groups of goats, but we have a couple of different herds of goats, and they kind of rotate. We've got some down south in southern Arizona. Right now they're in the like higher elevations where it's a little cooler. They tend to be happier there, but you'll see them again. They'll come back.
So quick recharge stations that are above ground.
Yes.
Are they protected with the shade balls at all, or if not, why not?
We don't have shade balls in them because shade balls actually would impact how much water is sinking down and how quickly. That water tends to sink down pretty quickly, so we're looking at an evaporation level of about 5 to 6%, which is pretty low. We usually see 11% in open reservoirs. For example, I think Lake Mead, because of like angles of the sun and things like that, hovers around 15% evaporative losses. So we actually have low evaporative losses. We don't use the shade balls here because we actually want the water to percolate, and we don't want to mess with sort of the natural percolation because that's how it recharges the aquifer best. I'm going to go in the back.
Do you know how many wells are tapping the groundwater? I mean, you're putting it in, how much is going?
Okay, so what we are recharging is not being tapped by any wells. Okay, her question was how many wells are tapping underground water. Those numbers are available on the Arizona Department of Water Resources website. Now, there are not any wells tapping these recharge districts other than our own wells. These recharge districts are only being used to store water that we can withdraw at a later time. This is sort of the savings account. If we have an emergency, we've banked quite a bit of water underground. We'll get into actual numbers in a couple of slides. But this is water that we would withdraw if we needed it in an emergency, so you cannot tap a well into this, and that is very heavily monitored. That said, overall well numbers are capped by the Arizona Department of Water Resources because they permit wells, And if you go on their website, there are thousands of wells. So I mean, there's not a way for me to give you an exact quantitative number. But if you go on Arizona Department of Water Resources, you can see everyone who has a well certificate, every well that's active, and then you'll see their annual withdrawal permits. So that's all available. I just don't have it off the top of my head.
How does that 6% recharge amount get determined? Why is it 6%?
I'll be honest, 6% is because the question was, how did the 6% number get determined for recharge? I'll be honest, some of it was just sort of happenstance. We did not have a way to effectively recharge until the mid-90s. And at that point, 6% was sort of what's left. 6% is also our best faith estimate of if we keep doing it on a regular basis, what gives us a good savings account, if you will. So in some ways, it's sort of like our interest, right? We're trying to find a good rate of interest, but we also can't cut off the water that we're already committed to send to our other customers. This was sort of what was left that we figured would be a safe number to put into the aquifer that we would A, be able to save, because you have a limited amount of space due to hydrogeology, and that B, would give us enough over time to actually have a good safety net.
What percent of the Native American water is for agriculture?
They use about, of that 35%, they use probably about 65 to 70% for agriculture. They're highly agricultural with this water.
So we have a lot of agriculture users combining these two.
Right, except Native American agriculture is just very different. I will be honest, they're growing very different crops, they're using it for very different things, they're doing very different methodologies. A lot of it for them is sort of a different cultural component than what we're looking at. So there is a lot being used for agriculture, but really the Native American communities, and if I will say, if Native American communities wanted to, they could stop using it for agriculture. We are seeing that in some of these tribes that are investing more heavily in ecotourism and in these sort of family entertainment type venues, which as far as I know have been very successful for them. So we are seeing a shift, just like we're seeing a shift in the general population.
I have another question. So why that the Native American community have such a scarcity of potable water?
Well, it depends on where you are, right? Like, we serve the Native American communities who are on our route, for lack of a better word. We serve Native American communities in 3 different areas. Where you see the lack of potable water, you really see up in northern Arizona, which is outside of our service area. But you're absolutely right. The Navajo don't have a treaty for water rights, and so they have a real dearth of water up there. There are parts of northern Arizona where there is no drinkable water, or there is a very short supply of drinkable water. So instead of just turning on the faucet or taking a shower or cooking, you actually will go out in a truck, you'll fill a water tank, and that water tank will last your home for a week or 2, depending on the size of the tank. It is not a great system, but it's sort of 2 functions. One is there's not a water system up there that's been developed that has the delivery capabilities like we have here in central Arizona. And 2 is that they've never signed a treaty, so they don't have definite water rights.
Could you explain in basic terms what an aquifer is?
Mm-hmm.
Where are they located? Are there multiple ones?
Okay, that's a big question, I gotta be honest. Like, we could spend the next 3 or 4 hours on that. An aquifer is essentially a deposit of groundwater that is fed by an underground source. In order to technically be an aquifer, you have to have an underground source that's refilling that. So we're really talking about rivers and lakes underground that are being naturally fed and not just being fed by percolation from above. That is technically what an aquifer is from a science perspective. We have sort of a different system here in Arizona because the ground, as you know, if you've ever tried to plant a tree in your backyard, I learned this the hard way, the ground here is very hard. So we have a very different system of aquifers than they have in, say, the southeast where I first started working in water. Our aquifers are basically smaller deposits of water than you see in other parts of the country, but we have thousands of them. Now, some of the water in our aquifers here, though, is inaccessible. It's just so far down that you really can't drill down there, or there's not enough water that effort for drilling would actually give you anything that would be worthwhile. The other problem we have is that some of our groundwater has a really high mineral content, so it's not that useful. We are working on something that is akin to desalination that would make some of that brackish groundwater usable. It's just not there yet as a technology. It's a technology that they're developing in Texas. We're working with them. It's still quite a ways out, but it is being worked on. We essentially in Arizona have arranged our aquifers into 3 different areas called active management areas. The 3 areas are basically named after the county. We have the Pima, Pinal, and Maricopa County active management areas, but I will tell you they are not contiguous with the counties. They are grouped based on hydrogeology. They are basically, we looked at the aquifers and tried to decide which ones are more similar than they are different, and so they are grouped that way. They are close, these groups are close to the counties that they are named after, but they are not exactly contiguous. In the active management areas, the aquifers are very, very closely monitored. That's where we're doing a lot of this recharge. Does that answer your question? Okay.
And then follow up the salinity of water
Yeah.
in Arizona. Is it a growing problem? Is
Yes.
it something you're tackling?
Salinity is a huge problem. It is a problem that we are working on, but frankly, salinity content is growing higher and faster than we can control it. We see really high levels of salinity within the Colorado River Basin. A lot of that's because there's less water in the river right now. When there's less water, the salt content is higher. The other problem we're seeing is that a lot of municipal and industrial uses are increasing that salinity. A lot of people have water softeners. Water softeners put a huge amount of salinity into the water supply, and because of the salts they're using, it is incredibly difficult to get it out of there. We actually have a national Colorado River Basin salinity control project that is run by the Army Corps of Engineers. And I will tell you, we are all working on it, but we cannot keep up with the amount of salt that's being redeposited by water softeners, clothing detergents. If you're using clothing detergents that are not organic, huge amounts of salt being put back into the water supply. I mean, there's that, and I'll tell you, the microplastics. Yeah, it's a huge problem. Between the microplastics and the salt, I mean, we are absolutely working on it, but we can't keep up with the amount that's entering the system. In the red back there? What other restrictions would happen after the farmers? We're going to get to that. Essentially, it's a tiered system, but the farmers kind of go first. After that, we have cuts at the municipal level, but they're pretty small. They're not the type of cuts that you're typically going to feel at your home level. After that, we do have bigger cuts. We're hoping to never get to that third level where there's larger cuts, but we will get to that in the slides. It'll make a lot more sense when we get there. I will, and I apologize.
As far as like water softeners and like what we're doing to purify the water, is there anything that the organization recommends?
He asked, in terms of water softeners and water purifiers, is there anything that our organization recommends? That's what I just said. And he asked, in terms of water softeners and water purifiers, is there anything that we recommend? I'll be honest, not really. All of the major softeners out there and purifiers out there, the ones that you sort of put on either your water heater or that you sort of put under the sink, those are all salt-based. What I do at my house, and again, this is not an organizational recommendation, this is sort of like at my house. I have, like, for the water that we drink, I have one of those carbon-based pitchers that you sort of pour it through the carbon. I find that that works fine. In terms of like washing my clothes, I use organic detergents, it's fine. In terms of my shower, it's hard water, it is what it is. I just kind of let it go, because to me, adding that salinity to the system just doesn't make sense. So I think they're also developing now, because I am vain like everyone else, they're now developing some sort of carbon filters you can actually put on your shower head. And those are, I've heard really good things about, and I haven't purchased one, but you have to, the thing with carbon is you have to change it out, so people don't like them as much. Because like every 30 days or so, you actually have to change it out. Okay, but yeah, I'd say, but those are working well, and we're hearing good things about them. But like a home water softener, I'm sorry, it's not good.
Yeah, we got at Home Depot a carbon-based water mold out thing that sits outside, and every so often it goes up a backflush and it comes out and it gets rid of all the chlorine.
Yeah.
We love it.
Yeah, he was mentioning he has a whole home carbon filter that he really likes. Yeah, those are good. I have a gray water system at my house, so I can't do that. I actually have a system that collects all of the like non-toilet water basically, and we use that for some of our irrigation and things like that. So those are also good. I know, non-toilet's gross, but. I would say for a while we were calling it toilet to tap, but people were super uncomfortable with that. Which was super understandable. Even I was like, communications, we gotta get back on this. So now we're telling everyone it's showers to flowers. Yeah, which is the exact same thing, I gotta be honest. Another fun thing we did last summer, and I think we'll probably do it again this year, is we did a Spotify channel of what we call short shower songs. So basically, if you take a shorter shower, you save water. And of course, in the summer when it's hot, you want to take a shorter shower anyway. And so we had a Spotify channel of like 3 to 5 minute songs. We were like, try and get your shower done in 2 songs. And they were all water songs. Like we had It's Raining Men and things like that. It was kind of fun. So we've done some fun stuff too, yeah.
I know that there's earthships in New Mexico, and that would be an excellent way to use our water like before time. Why don't we have a push for that?
You know, we're doing some of it, and we actually oh, you know what, I'm attached.
That's fine.
He's basically asking, I'm going to...
About earthship water technology.
Yeah, earthship water technology, which is essentially recycling water over and over and over. We do some of that here. We actually have almost 100% reuse of our municipal effluent as well as our farming effluent. Effluent is basically once you use the water, what's ever left over. Now, farming effluent goes to your aquifer because it seeps through the ground. It's a good thing. Municipal effluent is actually collected, and a lot of it is used for municipal, like when you see on the side of the road when they have like little plant areas, they use it for a lot of municipal irrigation. Golf courses use it, and we actually have almost 100% reuse right now. The problem is on that second or third go around, it gets more difficult to collect. The water starts to degrade. So we are working on that, but as people use less water, it also produces less effluent. So we also have this really funny thing where we have a lot of cities using a lot less water, which is awesome. We want to encourage that. But because of that, we have less effluent, which means we have less water for that second and third and fourth cycle. So it's an interesting problem. I just want to talk about this real quick because these numbers sort of blew my mind when we got them last year. We did a study to look at CAP and the economy and sort of what is the economic impact of just our system. And we found out that basically nearly $2 trillion of Arizona's gross state product to date is attributable to the CAP and the jobs and the sort of industry that we've brought to the area since we started making deliveries to Maricopa County in 1985. We kind of use that as our starting point. It's about $100 billion per year, which is approximately a third of the gross state product, and more than 1.6 million job years were created by the CAP. The entire study is actually available online on our website. If you cannot sleep, this is a great study. It's got like 320 pages of graphs. If you love numbers, this is a great study. There's also an executive summary if you're like me and you just want to read 5 pages. So. This is the Colorado River Basin, and I always like to start here just to give you guys an idea of sort of what we're talking about geographically. So the Colorado River is divided into 2 portions. There are 7 states that share the river as well as the country of Mexico. Mexico is not a state. The upper basin is Colorado, New Mexico, Utah, and Wyoming, and the lower basin is our home. It's Arizona, California, and Nevada. There are 7.5 million acre feet of an annual allocation of the river for the upper basin and 7.5 million for the lower basin, and then about 1.5 million for Mexico. I want to tell you guys a little bit of a story about how we got to these numbers because I think it's interesting, and we're going to talk about it again later. The Colorado River Basin was actually divided up in the 1920s as part of the Colorado River Compact. The states got together and they made a decision about how the 7 of them, and I will tell you Mexico was not at the table, we didn't invite them. The 7 states got together to decide how they were going to divide up between the upper and the lower basin, and then within those basins how they would divide up who got what. Arizona was a new state, and perhaps Arizona state governance was similar to what it is today because we did not sign the Colorado River Compact for like 20 years, which is why we got hosed. So Arizona, how our lower basin, our 7.5 million acre foot allocation, 2.8 million goes to California. Or I'm sorry, 4.4 goes to California, 2.8 goes to Arizona, of which we deliver about half, 1.5 million acre feet. And Nevada gets 0.3 million acre feet. So Nevada actually got the worst deal, but too bad, we don't care about Nevada, just kidding. We totally care about them, they're great neighbors. We do some recharge projects and some storage projects with them, so I'm just kidding. But Arizona did not sign the compact, so we hadn't been a state for very long, and even though we did not have the same population that California did, we have had a long history of doing more with less. And even in the 1920s, we couldn't even take our entire 2.8 million acre feet. This 2.8 million acre feet was really the birth of my organization. Now, you're probably wondering, like, who uses the other half of that allocation? We actually have a lot of on-river farmers. A lot of the farmers in Yuma are on-river. They have grandfathered rights, and they take water directly off the river. So at the time, in the 1920s and 30s and 40s, Arizona was not using its entire allotment of 2.8 million acre feet. We just didn't have a way to withdraw it. We didn't have a use for it. But a lot of people in Arizona also knew that Arizona, and central Arizona in particular, was never going to grow if we didn't get water into this area. And so in the 1940s, the Central Arizona Project was conceptualized as our way to use the rest of our 2.8 million acre foot allotment. The thought was, if we can move that water into central Arizona, we can actually utilize it. So that's why the canals were built to carry 1.5 and not 2.8, and that was sort of the thought. However, California had decided that it would just avail itself to some of our water, because California, they do that now. And so we actually went up and back to the Supreme Court twice against the state of California. There was California versus Arizona, and then Arizona versus California. We had like gunboats on Lake Powell. I mean, it was like for real. I mean, it's crazy, but it's all true. But we went to the Supreme Court twice, to the point where the Supreme Court was like, don't come back. But California was arguing that our use of Salt Verde River water, because they were tributaries of the Colorado River, should count towards our 2.8. And we said absolutely not. The 2.8 is main stem, in other words, main river water. We went up and back twice. We won. But the sort of takeaway on it was that if Arizona or California ever change their allotments, we have to have our state legislators sign off on it. That's important because this year when we did the Drought Contingency Plan, which we'll get to, that's why we had to take it through our legislature, whereas other states did not. It is still this decree that is in place that if we make changes to our numbers, we have to have our state legislators sign off on it. Arizona and California have to do it, the rest of the states don't. We are still the bad kids. And we still fight over that water. But yeah, so that's really the conceptualization of the project. We won all of those Supreme Court battles. We needed a way to move the water, and so the Central Arizona Project was born. President Johnson actually signed the enacting legislation into place. We have some cool stuff on the website where you can actually hear President Johnson's voice reading the legislation. It was from the Johnson Library, who was very generous with that. But yeah, so, and then we were built, and like I said, we started making deliveries here in the 80s and in the early 90s to Tucson.
I read it, now I know.
Oh, okay, sorry. So Colorado River shortage, this is the big question, right? What is going on? So basically, when a shortage is declared, the Secretary of the Department of the Interior is the one who makes that declaration. And this is true for the entire basin. When they're making these declarations, it is true basin-wide. That's why the federal government makes the declaration and not just any one state. I will say drought conditions are a little different, but for these shortage declarations, they're made by the feds. Essentially, the shortage is declared in August when the Bureau of Reclamation turns in its 24-month study. They do 24-month studies, they are always doing them, and we get the updated 24-month study from the Bureau of Reclamation every August. The study tells us what they predict the level in Lake Mead to be as of January 1st. Based on that number, we know whether or not we will be in shortage for the following year. So we've seen a decline in Lake Mead for the past, this is 15 years, I think I probably need to update it to 16 because we're getting close to our water year in August. But we are seeing declining levels in Lake Mead. And we have been very concerned that shortage is going to be declared by the Secretary. Now, of course, we run our own numbers internally, so we sort of know where things are at. But I will tell you, the big question is what is causing this decline? These slides were made by the agency, so that first bullet says extended drought. I'm going to say climate change. I'm going to say climate change. We are seeing a hotter and drier climate here in the Southwest. It is hotter and drier than it is in other parts of the country, and it's happening really fast. So I'm going to say climate change. I really don't like drought, especially because we don't have a drought declaration right now. You might have seen that the Weather Service has declared that we are not in a drought because we've had so much rain. That is true. We are technically no longer in a drought, but we are still seeing declines in Lake Mead because the rain we get here is only about 2% of our water system. Most of our water comes from the Colorado River, so the question is really, what does snowpack look like? The good news is we've had a great year of snowpack this year, but it's not enough to make up for the impacts of climate change that we're seeing. The second thing is the overallocation of the system or structural deficit. Now, I told you that fun story about the 1920s and the Supreme Court and all kinds of good stuff. One of the things that no one quite realized when they were doing the Colorado River Compact and dividing up the river in the 1920s is that they allocated more water than has ever actually been in the river. We're not sure why. We don't know if measurements were bad. We don't know if it was just a great year on the river. We don't know if somebody didn't carry the one. Nobody knows. And it doesn't really matter. The problem is we overdraft the river by about 1.5 million acre-feet every year. And when I say we, I refer to the entire basin. This is not just an Arizona problem. So some of it is California for sure. Let's not lie about that.
The federal treaty with Mexico, which is 1 million acre-feet.
Yeah, we give 1.5 million to Mexico. And I will tell you, one of the ways that we see this actually most severely is in Mexico. The Colorado River used to run all the way out to the sea until 1996. So within almost all of our lifetimes in this room, the Colorado River used to run all the way through and create a beautiful delta in Mexico. And now it has dried up. If you go to the Colorado River, there is still a channel there, but there is no water in it. And we're actually doing some wetlands restoration programs with them now, which is how we're using some more of that effluent, is to do some wetlands restoration programs in Mexico to help bring back some of the habitat for migratory birds and all sorts of species of fish and turtles and things like that. But it is really interesting to me that we have a major river that used to go all the way through Mexico and does not anymore. That right there to me is symbolic of the problem, and it's been symbolic of the problem since the late 90s.
So I thought they already had done some work on this already. Did it fall out? Because they did reach the ocean at one point.
Right, so we did, his question was, did we reach the ocean at one point with the Colorado River? Yes, we did an experiment with the National Geographic Society. CAP was a part of it, a whole bunch of different agencies were a part of it. It was about 3 years ago. It was called the Pulse Flow. There was TV shows about it. What it was an experiment to see if we released excess water out of Lake Mead, if we could make the river run all the way into the ocean, and then what would be the environmental impacts of that. It was intended as a short-term project. It was a short-term project. So we essentially pushed enough water into the system to make the river go all the way, and then stopped it because it was intended to be a short-term project. They're still studying it, but the results have been tremendous. And so one of the questions is, in addition to this wetlands restoration, should we be doing these regular pulses where we are essentially filling the river in? And if we do them, how frequently do we need to do them? How much water do we need to do them? What species are we bringing in? Is this good for native species? Are we bringing in non-native species, which is also a huge problem? So they're still doing quite a bit of research on that. It was a really fascinating project though, and I got to go down to Mexico when they did the pulse and see it go through. And I will tell you, it was incredibly meaningful to the people in that area. You know, we went down there and we were just down there on the CAP Jeep or whatever. I mean, people were out there with their kids and they were shooting off fireworks and they were grilling and just really enjoying themselves. You know, and grandparents were telling their kids about how this used to happen all the time, and you know, this was a huge part of our lives, and it was really impactful to see that, you know, because you sort of intellectually know that certainly people loved the river and they lived by it and they had a connection to it, but it was really impactful to see this really direct connection and how excited people were to see the river come back. So we've kind of already talked about this. This is the structural deficit, which we just talked about. Essentially, we are over-allocating the river, so we have a deficit. I'm going to skip past this just for the sake of time. But just so you guys know, essentially, we're seeing a decline in Lake Mead of about 12 feet a year, solely attributable to this structural deficit. So that's really the problem that we're trying to tackle with the Drought Contingency Plan, which we just passed. And I will tell you, we've had things before that. We had the 2007 shortage sharing guidelines. We had guidelines before that. The Drought Contingency Plan is really the biggest update. But what we are really trying to solve with it is obviously this decline in the back. It's about an acre foot a foot, because Lake Mead is a cone, so that top level is about an acre foot. So we're losing about 12 acre feet a year. About 1.2. Yeah, see, it's right up there. What? 1.2 million acre feet is 12 feet in Lake Mead. Each foot in Lake Mead is about an acre foot. So impacts of the structural deficit, I feel like these are kind of obvious. Like I love that we have a slide to be like, what are the impacts of having less water? Amazingly, we have less water. So yeah, it is driving, yeah, it's driving shortage. It means that we have to have, evaporation is bad. The other problem here is, yeah, we do have a treaty, and I don't like that we actually list this as a problem. We do have a treaty obligation with Mexico. Frankly, we owe them that water. Mexico was using the Colorado River water a long time before we were here in America. So there's that. Just gonna put that out there. We always list that treaty obligation as like one of those things we might not be able to fulfill, but let's be honest, if we're gonna talk about grandfathered water rights, they're first in line, just gonna say. I always get in trouble when I give these presentations. Like every time I get, like, I'm gonna get notes from the agency tomorrow. And I'm speaking to GPEC this week, so they're gonna be really terrified. So essentially, you had asked, and this was sort of the slide that I said we would get to that would explain it. This is the decline in Lake Mead. Essentially, each of these is a tier. So if Lake Mead hits 1075, and right now Lake Mead, I looked this up on Thursday, is hovering around like 1085 right now, because we've had good snowpack. But these are essentially what we want to call the shortage tiers. Up at the top at 1075, that's a tier 1 shortage. In a tier 1 shortage, Arizona takes a 320,000 acre foot cut. Most of that actually does flow to CAP because we're one of the junior priority users in the state. We're one of the newer organizations. So that 320, a nice lady asked me about the farmers. That 320 is going to mostly come from the Pinal County farmers. And they're already taking some voluntary cuts. Above this, we have what we're now calling Tier 0. We are still workshopping that term because Tier 0 is ridiculous. But basically, under the drought contingency plan, we've created Tier 0. So even above 1075, we are all voluntarily, when I say all, the 7 states in Mexico are all voluntarily taking some cuts so that hopefully if we hit a shortage, we are going to hit one of these less severe tiers. So we're taking some voluntary cuts. In addition to those voluntary cuts at 1075 or Tier 1, I'm pointing up as if I am tall enough to make this work. But the top one up there, Arizona takes 320,000 acre foot. Most of that comes directly out of our farming communities. That will basically wipe out Pinal County agriculture. That right there. Tier 2 is at 1050. Arizona takes a 400,000 acre foot reduction, and we also start seeing reductions in hydropower generation at Lake Mead. Not a huge problem for our organization because we have a very small Hoover power allotment. Big problem for Nevada and some of the other states. Big. 400,000 means we're going to start seeing some smaller reductions to the municipal system. Maybe not things that you'll necessarily feel at home, but there will be some restrictions. Tier 3, 1025, move to Michigan. Just kidding. I always thought about putting up there. Arizona takes a 480,000 acre foot shortage reduction. That means a third of our supply in the canal is gone. You're going to start feeling that at home. Uncertainty about what actions the Secretary will take to protect Lake Mead. The Secretary of the Interior could step in and shut the whole thing down. She has that power. And even with the drought contingency plan, she has that power. Potential loss of hydropower generation and instability in the electrical grid. So good times, really good times. Yeah, this is like stock up on canned goods. 1,000 is like definitely move to Michigan. Make sure you have a lot of canned goods, like zombie apocalypse stuff. Active storage in Lake Mead is going to be less than just what California has been allocated. Run of the river obligations mean that we don't have sufficient storage to meet deliveries to any of the lower basin states or Mexico. So, yeah.
The current level is about 12.
It's about 1085.
Oh.
Uh-huh. 1220 would be so amazing, thank you. Please, like, I know you guys are like, just do a rain dance or whatever, like, we need it. I'm just gonna ask, I ask everyone.
So by by the numbers
Yes.
predicted, like, that's like next year or the year after numbers.
So next year we're not going to, our prediction right now is that next year we will not have a tier 1 shortage because we've had great hydrology. Next year we should be able to stabilize everything. We'll still be in that tier 0 where we're taking voluntary cuts, but next year I don't actually think we're going to have a shortage. If you had asked me this a few months ago, I would have told you differently, but our snowpack has been great, and then we've also had like a late winter. It's, you know, and I know that sounds strange, but we got snow early and we've continued to have snow even later into the season. It's been kind of weird, but kind of great. So we should be able to sustain without hitting a true tier 1 shortage this year. Yeah, next year, well, we'll see. In the back.
You consider Lake Powell, because I don't know anybody except Mead, maybe that draws from Lake Powell and it's in the upper basin.
Yes.
But if the dam were removed, would Lake Powell all rain down and help Lake Mead?
No, Lake Powell and Lake Mead are operated in tandem with each other. Lake Powell is essentially the reservoir. It's the upper basin's version of Lake Mead. So if we drain Lake Powell, we completely cut off the water supply for the upper basin. And while some days I'm okay with that, like most people in Colorado and stuff are not cool with that idea. Lake Powell and Lake Mead, though, are operated in tandem, so we get an outflow from Lake Powell every year. The number of acre feet depends on the level in Lake Mead at the time. So that's why I'm saying we have them operated in a balancing tier. We get about 900,000 acre feet of water every year as an outflow from Lake Powell. That usually happens in the late summer. So we do get some water from Lake Powell, but we cannot just remove the dam and drain Lake Powell because then the entire upper basin is going to be down here with like torches and pitchforks because that's their reservoir. Lake Mead is essentially the reservoir for the lower basin, and Lake Powell is basically the reservoir for the upper basin. Oh, they do. They absolutely do. All of the states up there draw from it. Yeah, there's intakes for Colorado, there's intakes for Wyoming, there's an intake for New Mexico. All of that is up there. It's not just Page. They have intakes. The thing is with these intakes is they're not as big as you would think because they're mostly subterranean. Like you can actually go visit our intake, Mark Wilmer, the Mark Wilmer pumping plant on Lake Havasu, and like from above ground, it is the least exciting thing ever. It just looks like an industrial plant with a parking lot. Everything that's happening though, there's actually 6 giant rotors. I mean, they're taller than me, they're huge. That's all underground. So all these pumping plants, people are like, well, I never see it. And it's like, there's nothing to see. I mean, it just kind of looks like a weird boat arena. So yeah, and then the last tier here, 895, is what we like to call Deadpool. That basically means we're screwed. There's 2 million acre feet in storage in Lake Mead. At that point, we are not generating any hydroelectric power. You definitely want to have already bought your home in Michigan. Yeah. And I will tell you, we are designing the system and we are designing the conservation programs so that we never get to these lower tiers. And we're all working very hard to prevent it. We've never had a shortage. We will have one, I will be honest. DCP is a Band-Aid, the Drought Contingency Plan, which we'll talk about. But we're hoping that we have a tier 1, maybe a tier 2, and that we never experience these worst tiers. But we have to define them. So recent adaptation strategies. This is sort of everything up to the DCP that we've been doing. We passed DCP this year. We've been doing, this is the storage we talked about earlier. We've stored 3.4 million acre feet of water underground. We've done that with the support of the Arizona Water Banking Authority. It is stored all over the state. But we have 3.4 million acre feet of water underground. Some of it's in those recharge facilities that we saw pictures of. Others are in purely underground recharge facilities. Augmentation, we have been doing weather modification. If you are thinking cloud seeding, you are right. It's not working terribly well, but we are still looking at it. The problem with cloud seeding is that you can't control where the rain falls. So like we've spent a lot of time cloud seeding and create great rain in Wyoming, but that doesn't help us. So we got to figure out how to get the clouds to come here. We're working on it, but I will tell you that's the problem. It actually does work. Like you can seed a cloud and make it rain, you just might make it rain in Wyoming. And they don't collect it and give it back. We've also done the Lower Basin Pilot Drought Response MOU and the Innovative Conservation or the Pilot Conservation System. These were completely voluntary systems that we did with Denver Water and with some of our NGO, environmental partners, which has been saving 740,000 acre feet in Lake Mead under that first program and another 75,000 under the second program. We actually won an award for President Obama for those 2 programs because they were so innovative. It was one of the first times that you had cross-state line municipal agencies working together to save water in Lake Mead and doing it successfully, and also doing it with the help and support of the environmental community. We were leaving water in Lake Mead and in the river, not just to prop up Lake Mead, but to also prop up the delta, and we were really studying the impact on the plant and animal species there. It was a huge success. We've continued to do it. I mean, we've sort of put it up here as if it's historical, but we have continued to implement these programs, and it was exciting. I got to go to the White House and meet Joe Biden and pick up our award, and then it was glass, and I was really afraid I was going to drop it, but I got it back safely. These are the things I worry about. And then this last one is the one you've heard the most about, the Lower Basin Drought Contingency Plan. The state legislation has signed. President Trump has actually signed it. I need to update this, so we are now in full implementation. And just this week, we finished signing the last of the 21 sub-agreements. So essentially on the Drought Contingency Plan, I want to talk about that. I like to think of it as sort of multiple plans. You have a large drought contingency plan between the 7 states and Mexico about how they're going to prevent shortage. That's essentially that tier 0 stuff we talked about. Preventing shortage, taking voluntary reductions before we're even in a shortage tier. And then how we're going to share shortage going forward and essentially share the pain among the 7 states and Mexico. So that's the big sort of overarching capital D, capital C, capital P drought contingency plan. Within that, you also have an upper basin and a lower basin plan because we are hydrologically distinct enough that we need to have separate plans about how we're going to achieve those goals. And then under that, and the one that again you've heard a lot about, is our state plan. Each state then has to go back and figure out how they're going to meet their component of the plan. So we actually have an intra-Arizona drought contingency plan that did go through our legislature. We got it done on like January 31st at 10:30 at night, which was fun because our cutoff was February 1st. We made it. And so that's what you're seeing now. And so that's why you're seeing a lot more messaging about water conservation. The farmers in Pinal County are going to be getting less, and we have them on sort of a step-down approach so that they can make smart decisions about their crops. We couldn't really cut them off immediately because A, we don't want to stop agriculture, and B, they'd already made a lot of their orders for their planting season. So why are we implementing it? Arizona is the most junior, which means we get cut first, and so doing this program gives us a lot of stability. It gives us stability and predictability so that not only are we propping up the system, but we know what the direct cost is going to be to the state of Arizona. How did we do it? It was a collaborative process. And this was one of the things that we talked about in the book group, which I know most of you weren't there. But collaboration really is the key. And this is what has kept Arizona out of the situations like California where they've had really severe water rationing the last 2 years. Arizona, we like to fight. We fight about water. We do that all the time. And that's really what the newspaper likes to report on. And I get it. It's a lot sexier and more exciting than we all sat in a room for weeks and came up with this idea. But a lot of the reasons that we've been good at this is that we've been collaborative and we've been innovative. Arizona has sort of always been the tail, sort of chasing the dog. And so we know that we have to get ahead of things. You know, we've always been good about water banking. There are no other states in the Southwest who are doing water banking at the same level that we are. And in fact, we were the only state in the Southwest doing water banking until 2 years ago when Nevada started doing it in conjunction with us. So we have been doing a lot of innovative things like water banking, effluent reuse, really pushing municipal conservation, working with our farming communities to make sure that they're planting the right crops and at the right time. You know, and also pushing a lot of the scientific research to figure out how we can save water and do more with less. So the DCP is just another outgrowth of that. But I will say we have been really, really innovative. And yet we are actually in DCP now. It has started. When will it start? It started January 1st. You're in it. Welcome. Will it prevent a shortage? No, it really won't. The problem here is that we are using water between the structural deficit and climate change faster than it can be produced. Again, the good hydrology this year has been incredibly helpful. It has created an excellent bumper for us, but it's not enough. And I will tell you, rain here in Phoenix doesn't really help us. What we need is snowpack in the Rockies for the Colorado River. But again, none of it is enough, so we have to keep conserving. I know that I say this over and over and over, but conservation is the key, and the things you're doing in your homes and businesses are incredibly important.
I understand Phoenix's staff doing metropolitan area and country right now.
Mm-hmm.
Current trends continue. Ian, as new residential discussion, street
Right, so his question was about Phoenix being the fastest growing metropolitan region, population influx, and essentially the pressure that's going to place on the water system. We do predict for that. We have economists at CAP as well as at ADWR who are sort of predicting population inflows and sort of projecting out the impact on the water system. Right now, they're sort of at a stasis because even though we do have more people coming in, we're passing more water smart building codes. We're seeing people use less water on their lawns. We're seeing a decline in irrigated agriculture. So right now, it's okay. There is a critical mass, and I'll be honest, I don't think we know where it's at. But we're seeing smarter growth, and as long as we continue to have smarter growth, more density, less water usage, water smart appliances, less landscaping, xeriscaping, as long as we keep those trends going, we should be okay. But it's definitely something we have to be aware of. It's definitely something we are measuring and managing. So the question was about golf courses. Most golf courses are irrigated based on effluent, and because of that usage, they're not placing a ton of pressure on the supply. The other thing that's helping is people aren't golfing as much anymore. We're actually seeing a lot of golf, I know, sorry, I'm sad about it. A lot of golf courses are either going to desert landscaping. We're seeing a rise in popularity in the sort of desert courses. I don't really know what they look like because I don't golf, so I apologize. I've just heard of them. And then we're also seeing just fewer golf courses. We're seeing a lot of municipal golf courses get turned into parks and other uses. So we're just seeing fewer golf courses. So golf is not really pressuring us as much as people think. Golf is still not a great use of water, but the fact that we've got them on effluent and the fact that we're just seeing fewer golf courses is helping quite a bit. And I'll be honest, I don't golf, so. Yeah, yeah. But also golf is important to the economy, and it's always a balance, right? I mean, we have a lot of people who come here to play golf. We enjoy that tax money. When people are moving in here, it's good to have jobs. So it really is a balance, right? You've got to make sure. I talk about agriculture a lot, and I think a lot of people's knee-jerk is, well, agriculture shouldn't get that much water. But agriculture gives us food and fiber crops, which gives us food security. We're always talking about wanting to have food security, which means we have to produce food here at home. And I'll be honest, I love going to farmers markets. I bet a lot of you guys enjoy farmers markets too. The only way to have those is if we have agriculture. So the point here is that it needs to be collaboration and it needs to be balance. We can't just take out agriculture because we need food and fiber crops here at home.
What have you heard about hay? Hay takes a lot of water.
Yes.
If they're growing this just to ship it to Saudi Arabia for these horses there because they don't want to use their own water.
Right, so she's asking about the hay that's being sent to Saudi Arabia. Most of that, first of all, is happening in Yuma. And the problem there is that that's almost impossible to control because Yuma has extremely old grandfathered in water rights and they have direct on-river uses. So those farmers can grow whatever they want and they can do whatever they want with it. I mean, that's sort of the bedrock of the capitalist system, right? Is that, if you have access to water and you've had it for all this time and you have these grandfathered rights, you can grow whatever crop. You can grow apples, you can grow strawberries, you can grow hay. So it's a problem, but it's just not a problem that, frankly, I think we have a lot of solutions for because we can't tell the farmers what to plant. And some of that does go to beef cattle, but some of that beef comes back here. And beef is an incredibly intensive crop, if you will, in terms of water usage. So I think that's another question. Do we want to eat less beef? These are all the questions we have to ask. When you're thinking about water, you can't just think about the water you're using in your home. I'm on my soapbox now. You have to think about all of the non-water usages. Like when you use electricity, it actually uses more water to turn on a light bulb than it does to run your faucet. Because there's an incredible amount of water used when you're generating energy. So what was that? Even a CFL. It's really because it's the generation not so much at your lamp, it's the generation that's happening at the SRP or the APS or the power plant. Solar electric power is awesome and I love it. It uses more water than coal. Mm-hmm. And that's before you even factor in the manufacturing of the panels. So, because you have to cool it. Otherwise, these panels will get really hot and then they don't actually produce that much energy because they overheat. You actually have to cool everything and then you have to wash all the dust off the panels because they're out in the middle of the desert, which is where it makes sense to have them. So you have to really make smart decisions about your energy usage, the food you're consuming, your clothing. And I say this, I am a clothes horse. So I am preaching something that I'm not always the best at practicing. But it takes hundreds of gallons of water to make a pair of blue jeans. it takes 120 gallons of water to make one white cotton t-shirt. So when we're talking about water, it's not just enough to think about what you're putting on your lawn and how often you're flushing your toilet and showers to flowers. You have to think about your overall consumptive use, because energy, clothing is the second largest polluting industry after oil. In other words, it's worse than the airlines. Especially all this cheap stuff from like H&M and places like that. They're using tons of water, they're doing terrible practices in terms of human rights, and they are turning out lots of clothes that end up in the landfill. And all that fiber in your washing machine is just as bad as all the salt. I know, I'm terrible, sorry.
So what clothes should we be buying then?
So what clothes should we, okay, so I have spent a lot of time on this year, actually. I did a big presentation for Earth Day with Green Living magazine about sustainable fashion. One of the big ones is buy pieces that you're going to wear a long time. Buy things that you're going to wear. It's not a bad thing to buy clothing, but if you're going to buy something and you're going to wear it for 5, 10 years, that's not wasteful. I'm not saying don't buy clothing. Buy secondhand clothing. There's enough clothing out there right now to clothe everybody in the world for the next 8 years if we never produce another garment. So there's tons of great secondhand clothing, and I shop secondhand a lot because I really like designer clothing. So I use the Real Real, and I've got some local places. I know we are super off topic. I'm just going to go with it. But I use places like the Real Real and things like that, and I buy a lot of secondhand designer clothing because like a Diane von Furstenberg dress is going to cost me $600, or I could buy one for $70 that somebody wore 3 times. And I dry clean it once, and it's like brand new. So there's a lot of places to buy used clothes, and then just be conscious of where you're buying your clothes. There are a lot of great companies that let you wear your values. You know, there are companies out there like Replenishment and Everlane, and, you know, just do your research. There's tons of them out there that have great human rights practices, that are using recycled fabrics, that are like looking at their footprint in terms of shipping things and doing a great job. Now, it does tend to be more expensive, but shop your values. So think about it, like buy investment pieces, maybe buy a little bit less. It's tough, I know. Look at secondhand, and then look at the companies because you vote with your dollar. It's the same thing with food. You know, learn more about the food system. And it takes time, and I get it. We all have jobs. Look, I have a job, I have a kid, I do this. It's tough, but there are resources out there, and with the internet, it's actually a lot easier than it used to be. So there's a lot of great solutions on the clothing thing. And just be conscious, think about it. People aren't even thinking about it. All right, I'm getting the cutoff. So I have 10 minutes, or are we done? Okay, because it can go either way. I'm gonna skip over this, because like you already know we've implemented it, and there's like a nice picture. I'm in there somewhere, but you're never gonna find me because I'm short. I can't even find myself. So this is basically our message. Our conservation to date has kept the river out of shortage, and our conservation going forward is going to keep us in the least severe tiers of shortage. This is a U.S. Bureau of Reclamation. This is for the entire basin too. I just want to point out this is not just Arizona. But basically this is what we're showing here, which you can't see that well because the colors don't show up that well, is that with what we're doing, we're keeping the river above that 1075 tier 1 shortage. And it's really just our conservation levels that are doing that. Because as you can see, we're getting close to it, but that sort of purplish band is what we're doing with voluntary contributions, which is what we've kind of been calling that tier 0 under DCP.
So with the voluntary shortages, is that what happened around 2011 there?
Yeah. Yep. We started doing some of those programs in 2011, then we've been ramping it up. And under DCP, which you don't see on there because that started this year in 2019, we're doing even more. And so what we use this for is we call it, we're bending the curve. Through conservation, through all these different methods, through just using less, we are bending the curve. We are changing this downturn in Lake Mead. And hopefully, the DCP is going to buy us time to figure out the technology and the methodologies that work to sort of get that curve to start going up. And that's why I call DCP a Band-Aid. It doesn't mean that we don't have a shortage. It just means that we're going to have a less severe shortage, and we are buying ourselves time to figure out the next big step. And I will tell you, we as the 7 states of Mexico are already talking about this. I mean, Thursday we finished signing all the agreements. This is actually an old water supply bucket. We're a little bit higher, or a little bit different than that. That shows us at 1090. When I checked it on Thursday, I didn't replace the slide. We were at 1085. So, and as you can see, Lake Powell is right at about its midpoint. But yeah, Lake Powell serves up there. That's exciting. Oh, the CAGRD, we don't really have time for this, but our other function is the CAGRD, It's another function of Central Arizona Project. It is the Central Arizona Groundwater Replenishment District. What we do is for communities that are not on the canal, that don't have a turnout, which we talked about earlier, we will actually go and replenish the groundwater that they have pumped so that they can show that they have a 100-year water supply and develop that area. That's essentially what we're doing here. The problem with the CAGRD is that right now it's putting a lot of pressure on the system. It's a legislatively designed function that was sort of given to us as a lovely gift in the mid-90s. And the way the legislature designed it, we cannot say no to anyone who submits a statutorily compliant application, even if we don't have the water. So this is really one of the big problems that we've got to solve in the next couple of years if we're going to get serious about conservation. Because we cannot be telling our canal side customers, conserve, 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 and then constantly feeding this outer area construction and create an endless mouth. And so this is hopefully something we can get the legislature to do. We have been trying. Instead, they just cut our tax basis instead of giving us this. So your vote counts. Just think about that when you're voting. That's another way that you can conserve water. Vote. Yeah, make sure you vote. Make sure you vote for people who understand this stuff. Make sure you vote for people who will change this so that we don't have a huge problem.
Do you get any responses when you talk to the legislature?
Yes.
About like, when you say, hey, we can't be giving out water we don't have, what do they say back?
So his question was, when we talk to the legislature and we say, hey, we can't be giving out water we don't have, what do they say back to us? I'm not sure if I can say all the things they say back to us. I think some of it is they don't believe facts. We do have some people who just don't believe what I would consider facts. So that's always a fun one. You know, they're kind of like, well, we'll get to it, and it's unpopular because the home builders don't like this idea, and the home builders spend a lot more money in lobbying the legislature than we do, just to be honest. So they're not real excited about it. They're not real excited about this idea, but I will tell you, it has to happen. It has to happen. I mean, there is no fix for this other than a legislative one, and it has to happen. So I'm going to wrap it up there. I just want to point out that I have some goodies here. I brought pens, I brought Post-it notes, and I brought some literature. I don't have enough literature. I'm pretty sure I have enough pens. I don't have enough literature, but thank you guys so much, and please grab stuff. Thank you. I just don't want to, sorry.
Thank you, Heather. I think everybody enjoyed it as much as I did. And I hope that you'll come back again to talk about some of the other work that you've done. And it's a tradition that we have here to mug our speakers. So come back for another one soon.
Okay, thank you everybody. And please give our wonderful speaker another round of applause. That was a fantastic presentation. So that pretty much wraps up our day for